Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the 10 days at the Todos Santos 2019 gathering. We have two new members of the group today. We're also making an attempt right now to live stream this on Facebook. So if you are one of the watchers, would you please let Michael know that you can hear me and see me. Obviously, if you can't, you won't even... Are you getting a yes from anyone?
There's not too many people. It's just...
Oh, okay. Hi. Well, Kara mentioned Rupert Spira with a kind of grimace. Apparently my reputation as a guru killer has preceded me. And so I'd really like to clarify that, because I kind of like Rupert. He's got a beautiful voice and a very gentle manner and sweet face. You know, he wears beautiful shirts too, which I admire. So there's really nothing, and flowers, you know, all that. So there's nothing really wrong with it, except there is. And what's wrong with it is that he speaks authoritatively about things that to me are just magical thinking and have no relevance to what we are as humans, none. So in my view, it's only my opinion, and everyone knows I'll express my opinion at the drop of a hat, no worries there. In my view, he has created an entire fantasy world, convinced himself of it, and because he's rather hypnotic and attractive, he has managed to build a following of people who believe in that stuff. Now, I'm not recommending that anyone disbelieve it. I don't believe it. But what I do recommend for everyone is when someone like Rupert makes a statement like, all there is consciousness, and people don't really exist. Asking yourself, is that true? How does he know that? Does he have some insight that other people don't have? How does he get to make a statement like that with such authority and sound so sure of himself? And what does it mean, really, to say that people don't really exist? How could that be? We're all people. We seem to be existing. And as I said the other day, if one of us gets cut, the blood will flow, and what good would it do to say, well, that person doesn't really exist? I don't think that's really where we want to go with our observations of this world. In my view, we should take what we see, feel, and hear very seriously and not write it off at all. That does not mean that everything we see is just as it is in the world. Obviously, we all have distorted views depending on our nervous system. For example, my hearing is very bad, so you may be hearing birds right now that for me aren't there. So there's a difference. And we all had a family of origin that prejudiced us in one way or another to see the world this way and not that way. What might feel kind to one person might seem very unkind to another person, for example, and that may have been programmed very early in life. So there are these differences. But to say that there are differences does not mean that this is not real. In my view, what we're all doing here, is as real as it gets. There's nothing more real than this. And the statements of these gurus about higher consciousness, that's the part that's not real, to me. I've looked into it deeply, spent my life at it pretty much. I practiced psychotherapy for 20 years and so spoke with hundreds of people on a level deeper than the usual social level, where the cards were on the table. And I took all those people seriously as people. I took their stories seriously. I took their pain seriously. And I could never tell myself that pain isn't real. If they only knew that universal consciousness is what we really are, then when your wife leaves and leaves you with the 2 kids to take care of too, no problem. Higher consciousness will take care of everything. You see, and that's my critique of not Rupert in particular, but of the non-dual gurus who really base their belief system on some 20th century gurus and their writings and speech. I mentioned Nisargadatta the other day. I'm not sure of this, maybe Rupert is in that so-called lineage, I think he is. And Nisargadatta said to his interviewer, David Godman, that no one had ever understood anything he was saying except one person. And it's none of these gurus or their teachers. It was someone else entirely. And so here you have statements being made referring apparently to what some past master said, but the past master was never understood at all, completely misunderstood. So I think we just need to keep that in mind when we imagine non-duality, for example. I actually have no idea what that means at all. And I've thought about it a lot, looked into it. I'm aware of a lot of the writings. Non-duality, I've not seen any. I understand that the word has a definition or a series of definitions, and we can look into that. But I don't see any non-duality. When I look around this room, what I see is a lot of individual people with individual minds and bodies. And for me, it's the body and its nervous system that produce consciousness, not some outside source that's beaming the consciousness down on these clay figures. I just don't see it that way. And so I wanted to make that clear now because we have a couple of new people, and I want you to apply, if you will, the same test to everything that I say. No matter what I say, if it strikes you as worthwhile, please ask yourself, how does he know that? What's the meaning of that? When he says such and such, what does that mean? Because in my view, that is the question that can bring you awake in an instant, in this moment. I don't think that imagining that Brahman is in charge of all this or whatever the story is can bring anybody awake. I think that will keep you very asleep, because it won't be your experience, but someone will tell you, but you can have, this experience is available, and then you will seek that experience. And the seeking is how you remain asleep. It's exactly what it's for. It stops you from seeing that this moment is the only moment we ever really have. In the next moment, something terrible might happen. There are events beyond our control. We're all subject to events, whether we like that idea or not. I have a beating heart. I'm a 74-year-old man, could quit. And if it does, this talk will be a lot more interesting than it is now. So I've given you the talk now. Please regard me with skepticism. That would be a great gift. So with that, are you getting anything over there, Mikhail? Yeah? Okay, well, hi everyone on Facebook.
Yosh is also watching live. Our friend Joseph.
Oh yes? Beautiful.
Hey Joseph.
Well, so with that as prologue, I'd like to open the floor up to discussion, questions, conversation, and reflections.
I was listening to an Alan Watts thing this morning, and he said something that kind of resonated with me, but I'm not sure it's your experience, so I was just going to run it by you. But he was saying that there's more to the brain than just consciousness and concepts.
There's more to the brain.
There's more to the brain than just that. There's more to, and what he was meaning is that it's attached to, from what I got what he was saying, it's attached to the universe at some level, where you can go out and observe and feel like you're one with everything, be connected beyond concepts.
So he asserted that.
Yeah.
What was the evidence?
Well, let me think. I think it'd be his, in your definition, his phenomenology, maybe his experience, and he's sharing like you are, that he feels that way in his perceptions,
so
in his awareness of whatever he perceives through his process.
Right. So I feel that way. Is that good evidence?
Well, yeah. What I was going to relate to is that for me, as more identity drops off, or the conceptual, I still feel like there's a different aspect of my being here that's still connected somehow to more than just my present moment.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I like Alan Watts. I've quoted him in my own writing, and I owe him a debt because I learned many things from his writing. But I did not learn his view of metaphysics at all. I'm not saying that he's wrong.
Yeah.
But I see no evidence for that proposition, and I see some evidence against it.
Okay.
For example, if a part of the brain is damaged, there are predictable losses. So apparently, the brain functions on a material level, and if you, say, hit your head very hard, have a concussion, you will lose some abilities. Yep. Maybe that will heal, maybe it won't. I've had 2 concussions. It's another reason not to believe anything I say. So there is some evidence, and growing evidence, that the brain functions according to the principles of physics, just like everything else in this room, and that there's not some outside magical force manipulating it or sending it messages. But that could be wrong. So I'm not saying that Alan is wrong, but what I am saying is Alan had a lot of similar ideas, which I consider magical thinking, although I like a lot of his understanding of Buddhism and Chinese culture in general, and learned a lot from him on that level. And so if you think about Alan Watts, he had a pretty hard life. He was an alcoholic and a tobacco addict, and killed himself with those 2 substances. And so maybe he had the need for comforting ideas, what I call attractive fictions. And if a fiction is attractive and it comes up in your thinking, you'll say, well, that feels pretty good when I think that way. It doesn't mean it's wrong. But the point that I'm trying to get across in all of these conversations is that when we believe in things without knowing that they are true, we might follow that road for a long, long time and come to the end, and it will be a cul-de-sac. And it'll be a callejón sin salida. And you will just be there with you've climbed a ladder and the ladder's up against the wrong wall. So it's now that one must awaken, not later after I have learned more or purified myself sufficiently so that I deserve being awake. This is awakeness. We're all in it. Our nervous system is producing this awakeness. It's the awakeness, for example, that hears these sounds coming out of my mouth and without trying makes them into ideas. No one's doing that. Awakeness is doing it. The awakeness, you don't have to produce that awakeness, you are that. And as soon as we understand, this is what the great people were pointing at. They found it in themselves. And when they point, lesser minds get confused and misinterpret all that. And whip up these stories of some kind of magical outside non-material forces. And that may be true, but I see no evidence, as I say, for that. Does that kind of get it?
Yeah, it does. But there's some level of it being, it can still be what you're saying, but it can still be, at some level, you're connected to everything somehow, but that's it. Still, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying that anything extends, but just that when I'm in open space, I feel way more connected to this space right here. Maybe it is my mind and my brain just doing that, but at some non-conceptual level, I feel more connected to just this space here.
I'm not quite hearing you.
At some non-conceptual level, I feel more connected to the universe than just this space right here.
Well, of course.
Well, then that's all.
Yes, I think we all have those feelings from time to time, but that does not mean that the laws of physics cannot produce that feeling, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Now, this is a very important point if we're really going to go into this. The human mind, which is in a sense non-dual, in the sense that our minds are connected through reading and through hearing, so we have an awareness of the world that is not ours alone, but a shared human awareness. That's evolving, and we are learning more and more. A simple example is malaria. It was believed once that malaria was spread by bad air. And so ventilating a room very well would prevent malaria. And later that was found to be nonsense. There's a mosquito that takes the blood from one person and injects it into the other person, and that couldn't be understood until humans understood the germ theory of disease. And so that wasn't evil spirits. Well, there's another example. 1,000 years ago, if someone had an epileptic fit, they'd call in the exorcist, right? That's all they knew to do. Now we know what an epileptic fit is, and we know how to treat it medically. And so we must understand that we're in that same condition now. We're further along the trail, but we don't know the explanations for everything. In fact, the explanations that we do know are very small compared to this grand universe. And what I'm advising is to break the habit of believing in explanations just because science cannot explain this now. What I would say is probably science will explain it later. And if you understand that all you can know is what you know right now, you're awake. You're in this moment. I don't know, you can ask me questions to which I have no answers. Like you might ask, Robert, why do you feel connected to the universe? Because I agree with you, I feel connected up myself. But I don't have a supernatural explanation for that just because I have no physical explanation for it. That's what you call emptiness. You allow the emptiness to be there and you don't rush to fill it in with some explanation. This is a really important point. See, I'm not, unlike this guy you mentioned and others like him, I'm not religious at all. I'm not speaking about religion and spirituality here. This is the end of spirituality for those who want it. That does not mean that you will not have beautiful experiences, loving experiences and compassionate experiences. Quite the opposite. I feel tremendous compassion. It's unceasing, unending compassion, really. But my compassion is for our ignorance and our pain, not because some system encourages me to practice compassion. Practicing compassion is the opposite of compassion. If you have to practice it, you don't feel it. If you feel it, you don't practice it. You just go out in the world and do what you can with all these problems. And there are so many problems. A third of this world doesn't get enough to eat. Almost that many people don't even have clean water to drink as they starve to death. So if we don't really need to be encouraged to be compassionate, just knowing that should melt your heart at least a little, I would think. So that's the idea. My critique of spirituality, which I have now written about in 2 books, is that it takes our mind off reality. It says that it is reality. And I say, no, that is not reality. I'm not saying there's nothing in it. There are some things, interesting ideas in some of these traditions. But the traditions are mostly based on a time in history when there wasn't any science. And there were no explanations for thunder except that Thor was angry or whatever. And that's the level on which Hinduism is also. It's a religion of ignorance, in my view, and not a source of great wisdom. There is some wisdom in it. There's wisdom in all the traditions because they embody the human experience, and anything that preserves human history can be a very useful source of how did the ancestors take care of these kinds of things. That's good to know, but it does not define truth. So I would take the capital T truth out of the vocabulary. We humans do not have access to anything so grandiose, I say. Yeah?
Yeah, no, that's what I wanted to hear was your living perspective of it. That's what I was curious for.
Right, that's my perspective, and it can be accepted or rejected.
Yeah, and well, I like it. I just wanted to hear it.
Except that there's something that's a bit different between me and Alan here, if I can point that out. I gave you a long answer, but you didn't have to ask yourself, how does he know that? Because I made no assertions. I just said, this is the way I see it, and I could be wrong. Now that's honest. And when I hear these big name gurus talking, they never say anything of the kind. In fact, they will tell you, I know what I know, you can't know it yet, but when you learn the system well enough, then you'll get it. And Mom, wow, what a conversation killer that is. It's a buzzkill. What if I told you that? I know I have this great secret, Mike, but you're not prepared to hear it. Go sit on the mat for 5 years.
Well, I would just say, how much can I just pay for it now?
Yeah.
Give me the true cost up front.
Well, unfortunately, an attitude like mine cannot be purchased. It just comes with the package, or it doesn't.
Yeah, no, but if you said that, I would try to shorten the curve, that's all. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, we're moving along here.
Yeah, I would like to ask you why you do not properly kind of respect non-duality, because I see that I see that just you have a very fine differentiation of what non-duality is. Like in my view, that what you say about the stream of consciousness, and therefore that the seer and the seen and the act of seeing is one thing. This is, I think, the essence of non-duality. So I wonder why it is so hard for you to basically say yes to non-duality.
Well, it depends on what you mean by non-duality. If you tell me exactly what you mean by it, define it, I'll tell you if I accept that or I don't.
I would say that my self is one thing.
Your health?
Myself.
Yourself is what?
Just one thing.
Well, then you'd have to tell me what you mean by yourself.
Yeah, this comes in line with reading your texts, because this act of splitting, because like you're thinking of yourself in the future, yourself, something could happen to me, and instead it is just one flow of things. Like it's not me that happens these things too. That is for me the end of duality and the beginning of non-duality.
Okay, but you haven't said what you mean by the word self. What is that?
Good question.
It's a really good question.
Yes.
And you see, if you take that for granted, and you just say, well, of course, myself, of course, obvious, then you haven't looked deeply enough. We were talking yesterday about the 5 skandhas. In Buddhism, there is no self at all. It doesn't exist. The self arises when various streams mix together temporarily and in each moment produce a self. For example, I'm looking at this room, so there's visual input, and I'm also hearing sound, and I manage to match them up through experience, but they're really not matched up. They're 2 different streams entirely. And that and the pressure of my body on this chair and a bunch of habits in each moment produce experience that feels unified, but it isn't unified. It's made up of many different parts. We just automatically mix them together moment by moment because that's a human capacity, an automatic capacity. Just mix them together moment by moment, and we call that myself. And what I'm saying is that's okay as a starting point. But if one is really interested in these matters, then I think you have to say, okay, there's this stream, but what is it? Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? And what I say, when I look into my own, a lot of it comes from training. So is my training myself? It was someone else trained me, so why wasn't it herself or himself? And I just took that on. Is my body myself? I guess so, to a certain extent. Without a body, I don't really think there would be a self, do you?
Usually required.
Okay, that's a good answer. Usually required. There may be some exceptions. I agree with you. It's possible. You know, there may be ghosts. As Carl Sagan said, this is a demon haunted world, by which he meant that we whip up some of us imagine that there are spirits in this room. The spirits of someone who died in this house, for example, might, if that happened. I hope it didn't, because you're sleeping here. Yeah. Well, but if that happened, maybe that's supposed to be now in a non-material form floating around the room. It could be. So, see, the self, the basic idea here is that we don't know what myself is. And so, since we're ignorant right from the get-go to say, and myself is non-dual, which means that everyone else's self is the same as yours, that's a pretty big step when we don't even know what the self is. And is Giulio's self really myself? I don't think so. When I speak with him, of course we have things in common. We're both humans, that's a shared experience. But he's had a different life from mine, and we recognize that in each other. Yeah, am I right? Of course. Even the way we spent last night was different. After all the drinking and dancing, we split up, and he went his way and I went my way. What I did is hit the bed and was asleep in 3 seconds. That's a kind of a harsh party for an old guy like me. We did it last night, we really did. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question, Marcus. I don't have a complete answer to that question.
No, thanks. Right, it's a good answer, and I see where you're coming from.
Yes, thank you. Who else wants to be victimized?